As we go into this next period or phase in my relationship with Hai and the facilitators, I feel I need to give some context. So, one of the things that I learned several years into this is now 2 years after all of this has occurred, and in that 2 years I've spent well over 1,000 hours exploring in depth, trying to figure out what's gone on, trying to seek help, trying to restore sanity, etc., etc. And one of the things that I learned in one of the most useful and sadly one of the few studies done to look at the correlation of childhood trauma and challenges in adulthood is that those people with a score of 7, for example, in the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, the largest study that I'm aware of, there is a literally 5,000% increase in the probability that someone will have attempted suicide at least once. And one of the things to understand about probability fields is that they are determined by the situation and the environment. So, for example, there can be a probability field that in the United States today, fully 25% of adults will be experiencing some major form of mental emotional dis-ease. Could be depression, could be anxiety attacks, this, that, and the other. Now, that's a probability field created by a culture that does not know how to deal with emotions, that devalues emotions, that educates people mentally and physically, but not emotionally, that shames emotions. It's a probability field in a high sugar, high chemical diet. It's a probability field in a high stress culture. So it's a probability field in the amount of sleep many people give, etc., etc. So this is a probability field. And what this means is that if we as individuals want to step out of that particular probability field, we have to take additional steps to lower the probability that we'll be part of that 25%. And so there is individual control. Always there's individual choice to some degree. But it gets harder and harder when you have a higher and higher probability field. Like if you're surrounded in an epidemic of flu where 3/4 of the people around you have flu, it's not guaranteed that you will catch it. But if you don't get enough sleep, if you don't take enough vitamin C, if you don't have a strong immune system, if you are under stress from trauma, there's a very high chance you'll be part of that 75%. And so the thing that we want to help individuals do in a probability field that they're going to be sick, hurt, make less money, commit suicide, etc., is teach and empower individual on the facts. What an individual needs to know is what I call the headwind, the pressure that is circumstantially, biologically, mentally, emotionally, culturally pushing them. It's the headwind. You can walk against a headwind, but it depends on the intensity. You need to educate the individual on what's lined up against them. These are the odds that you're playing against in this culture, in this environment. What we need to be doing culturally is changing the odds. You know, it's one thing to go to Vegas knowing that there is a 55 to 95% chance that in any hand we're going to lose, and try and train the individual to come out a winner betting against the house. You know, that's one approach. And yes, if someone's got to be in Vegas and they've got to play, by all means, educate the individual. But this is not a successful strategy if we want a country of winners, if we want a culture or a group or a community of winners. The real change happens not by getting one individual over from the probability field that is loser to the probability field that is winner. That's great for the individual. But our real responsibility as a community, as a culture, as a healer, is to change the probability field so that 85, 95, 99% of people are winners, just as a byproduct of being in this environment. I'm a gardener, and I work extensively with thousands of varieties of plants. And one of the most basic rules of gardening is you don't judge the plant. You assume that there is something fundamentally healthy, beautiful, and alive within that plant that wants to grow. And so your job as a gardener is to put that plant into healthy soil. And the plant will do its thing. You don't have to bargain with it. You don't have to bribe it. You don't have to threaten it. You know, you better grow or I'm going to cut you down. No. A plant innately wants to grow. Life wants to grow. We want to be happy. We want to grow. And if that's not happening, there is something missing in the environment. A lot of it is ignorance. You know, we don't know what's missing because we don't understand the disease. We don't understand the imbalance. Plants are relatively simple. You got to get the light right. Some plants like shade. Put them out in the sun, they're going to burn. Some plants like sun. You put them in the shade, they're going to die. So you've got the light variance, the pH variance, the amount of nitrogen, the amount of water, and the temperature. And if you get those right, that plant will be happy. With people, there's a couple of other variables, but this same principle is true. And just like a doctor, you know, with our physical body, our body wants to grow. And if a doctor keeps the disease, you know, the wound clean, stitches it up properly, that wound will heal. A smart doctor doesn't look skeptically at a client because the stitching is getting infected. The doctor knows, aha, I didn't have my hands fully washed. Something got in there. That's on me. We need to apply more antiseptic. We may need to reopen the wound and clean it. But somehow when it comes to mental and emotional diseases, we're at a state. You know, back in the, you know, a few hundred years ago when Louis Pasteur was first discovering germs, it was a new paradigm. You couldn't see them. So nobody believed they exist. And there was an incredibly high mortality rate in the surgeries because doctors didn't wash their hands. Now, Louis Pasteur figured this out and he started washing his hands, and he inferred from the evidence that germs must exist. And he tried to tell the other doctors, they wouldn't believe him. They carried on murdering thousands upon thousands of patients because they weren't going to be told by some airhead that something they couldn't see with their own eyes existed and that this was killing their patients. Nor did they want to face the fact that they had killed so many Doctors love to be right. And so they refused. And Louis Pasteur was ostracized, criticized, humiliated, and had a terrible time for taking a stand for his patients ahead of politics, ahead of money, ahead of the prevailing belief. But his patients lived. And now we all know exactly that Louis Pasteur was the sane one. We're in that kind of terrain in the psychosomatic arena of health, in the mental emotional arena of health. There's so much we don't know. There's so much we discount because we can't see it. We don't understand it. We're too dissociated from our own stuff to be involved here. And so I did not fully understand the link in my high ACE score and the patterns starting at age 14, which was the first time that I carefully considered the desire to die, understood the reasons. I mean, people are not idiots, and when they want to die, there's usually, it's a pretty anti-life posture. You know, there's just a few things. In the Philippines, there's a tarsier monkey that is so sensitive that it's sensitive to light, it's sensitive to touch. It's a very, very slow, and it's one of the smallest monkeys. Now, this monkey will commit suicide if it is overstimulated, if it's caged and overstimulated, because the amount of pain that it's in, relative to its optimal environment is so high it would rather die. Now, but this is quite an unusual thing. There's very few animals, and we're 100,000 years out of the jungle. There's very few mammals and animals that are actively trying to commit suicide, and we're one of them. And the reasons are all culturally and environmentally induced. We have created a culture and an environment in which suicide is one of the leading health risks. So my first wave was at 14, and my careful assessment between, first of all, when I realized powerlessness is really, really hard to deal with. When you're in pain, when you're in trauma, and you feel powerless to stop it, and no one is acknowledging it, and it's chronic, it's a devastating experience. And one of the first things you need to do is gain a sense of power. So my first power was actually, suicide was not the problem. Suicide was the solution. I felt an increase in power. It's like, if this gets too bad, I could be out of here in 5 minutes. That's power. It doesn't feel at all like this has been going on for years. I don't know when it's going to stop. It is so painful. That's powerlessness. And trauma can enter a timeless state. So I experienced this first wave at 14. My first power was to realize I could die. My second power was to realize I could run away from home. And already experiencing complete stonewalling from the adult community around me. There's a complete shaming of most children, in my experience, who talk about the intensity of their feelings around stuff that is considered somewhat normal or just denied, and I don't want to hear it. Don't tell me that kind of thing. You are one of the lucky children. So other adults, not a resource, not an option. It feels terrible. It feels terrible to be in so much pain that you want to die and be absolutely certain that no matter who you tell, you're going to feel worse because they're not going to understand, they're not going to validate, they're not going to do a damn thing. They are going to shame, interrupt, minimize, and discount, which is part of the big reason you don't want to be there to begin with. This is the endless loop of emotional suppression and denial by scared adults who do not want to confront an abusive parent, an abusive culture, an abusive situation. They don't want to deal with it. It's not my thing. That's the whole American, ethic. And so my first power was suicide. My second was running away. And those two things, I would evaluate them like, is it getting too bad? Is it worth, literally learning to hunt? I'm a vegetarian, raised a vegetarian. Is it worth learning to hunt, learning to eat meat, reading? And I started reading the books, what are the edible plants? Is it worth it just to be done with this? I did a lot of meditation in my teens just with the headphones covering my ears so I couldn't hear the screams, I couldn't hear the arguments, I couldn't be driven crazy by what was going on outside my bedroom door, which included the abuse of 4 younger siblings. And that, the retreat, just the choice and feeling like, it was a bit of a toss-up, which was worse. Compartmentalizing in my room and dissociating, or toughing it out in the Canadian wilds. We live right up near the forest, and I'm very good with my hands. I've, love building things, so I love nature. So that was a toss-up, but when I evaluated it and really looked into the detail, like I'd have to give up my meditation tapes because there'd be no batteries out in the woods, and you get into it, and you realize it's manageable for another year, until I can leave home at 17. So that was wave number 1 and the solution. The subsequent waves of depression and a desire to die occurred every 5 to 2 years afterwards. There was one period of intense kind of dissociation and overwhelm and stuff, and needing to eat and stuff, and and suddenly I became bulimic, and then it kind of disappeared, and then there was a big, the crisis actually increased as I checked off all the goals and all the things that I thought were about success in doing it. So no debt, savings, beautiful house, working the job I like to work with a fair amount of mastery, money to buy stuff, perfect diet, all organic food, tons of therapy, workshops, crystals, peaceful plants, doing things I wanted to do. Ironically, as I checked these things off and these feelings didn't go away, what happened was I created a level of serenity in my environment, number 1, in which I felt the reverberation of all these repressed emotions that I didn't fully understand more and more, number 1. Number 2, the ability to distract myself and go off and achieve something. See, because the society holds out this scorecard thing like, I'd already built 2 houses, you achieve the American dream, and then you'll be happy. And what was happening is, the more I achieved this dream, the more I realized that it had nothing to do with my happiness. And that's a real crisis, when there's nowhere else to go. When you're doing 6 hours of therapy with the best practitioners you've found, weeding that down from 30, when you've done this, when you've got the diet, and everyone's looking at you, and saying, wow, what a great lifestyle. And I'm saying, you haven't a clue. My energy level is going down, my irritability is going up, my rage is going up, my impatience are going up, and I'm smart enough to know that these are pain signals. These are pain and fear signals. And I have nowhere else to go. I don't want more than I have. This is way over the luxury I dreamed of as a child. I mean, I don't want a Lamborghini. I mean, that's not doing it. Like, let's just hang in there until we have a... I'm not interested. I want to feel healthy. I want to be able to connect with people and not go through this panic that I go through. I want other people to understand me and be able to speak in a language where they can. And I'm not succeeding at that in any reliable way. And I have people telling me that I'm the most effective communicator that they've ever met. So that doesn't sound hopeful. It's not like, oh, if I'm 10 times better than the most effective communicator, then it's all going to clear up. What was supposed to do it isn't doing it. My last big push was to do everything on my bucket list in a year. I spent 30 grand, went around the world, did every little whim. It's like, because I wanted to die. And it's like, come on, there's got to be something to hang around for. It's like, okay, we'll do everything on our bucket list. And then I got hit with a wave, and it was the biggest wave. It's like, I've got nowhere to go. Where do I go from here? There's not a single therapist that knows more than I do, or they'd have told me, presumably. I've gotten so allergic to therapists, I'm enraged. I'm enraged by one more naive, untrained person who says, without even listening to a word that I'm saying, I know just the thing for you. Just come and spend $750 with me. People are clearing up right and left. After you do that, 10, 20, 30, 40 times, and they say, well, I guess, wow, you know more than I do about this. Oh, I had no idea you've done this, you've done that. And yes, and if you'd had a questionnaire or asked any of that, you wouldn't have recommended yourself. And then they get defensive. And the worst thing in the world is having to pay a therapist who's defensive because it's clear they don't know what they're doing, but this isn't a relatively new experience for them to have it so blatantly expressed and to where they have to see it. And they don't know what to do about that. And they hate being in that position. They're supposed to be the expert. And then you got to take care of therapist feelings because they're getting so upset. I'm scared of the backlash, and it just, I don't, and then you can't just, when you see that coming, you can't just walk out of the therapist and just say, I'm not paying, because then I feel like a crook, because they don't get that they haven't served me. So I have to take the time on my dime to explain. And they don't offer a refund. So this whole build-up. And so I've had it. I'm exhausted. I'm irritable. I don't like the trend. I don't know where else to go. And so I write a list. I feel like I'm at my wit's end. I don't have an answer for that question. There's always this dialogue inside. I want to die. I get it. I don't want to die. Why? What's your plan? Like, what are you going to do if we live for another few years? I don't know. Well, then we're going to die. I mean, I'm not putting up with endless, chronic pain indefinitely. I'm not going to keep paying fools tens of thousands of dollars just to learn that I feel like an idiot again because their answer is, well, it worked for so-and-so, it worked for so-and-so, and it's just miserable. And so I had no answer. So this was the first time. There's a few times in these waves where, my first step is always internal. Can I come up with a reason to live? And some of my most exciting years have been the answers to that question. Like one time I wanted to die, and I knew exactly why. It was, just mediocrity. And I said, well, what if, rather than waiting for a client to hire you to do something really exceptional, what if you just built phenomenal 6-7 foot tall, bronze, crystal water sculptures? What if you just built them? Forget it. It doesn't matter if anyone buys them or whatever. No one's asking for these really interesting things. But what if we just built them? Would that be worth living for? Well, that was one point. And what if we started some groups, some meetup groups, healthy, I started several meetup groups on healthy relationship. What if we started a joy group, to get together and experience joy and different peak experiences? Would that be worth it? And what if we did this? What if we did that? And, up to that point, I'd been able to somewhat rationally say, well, yeah, as irritating as these chronic things are, as painful as these chronic things, that seems kind of worthwhile. Or what if we traveled around the world and looked for a country that feels better than here, and that took me to Thailand. And so that felt great. But this time, it was becoming hard to lift my limbs. And I was realizing, I don't want to lift my feet when I walk. And it's like, Kaiser, forget it, that's my health insurance, forget it. You go in there, they sent me, I felt so terrible after their protocol and didn't know a clue. And their only response was just to go through it again. And it's like, I don't trust you for a moment. There's no care, you're not taking the time to listen, you're pushing me into these 15-minute appointments. I can't figure this out. And I've written 250,000 pages. And you think you're just gonna guess it in 15 minutes and it doesn't work at all, and here's your $3,000 bill, and how about another one? And so, and that was depressing. That was increase of powerlessness, increase of depression, increase of aggravation, everything about it. Unhealthy, mentally, emotionally, physically. And so it's like, even if they could keep me alive in that protocol for another year or so, I'm not interested. And so I wrote an email to the NorCal Announce, which is the high email list. I said, I am dying. I looked at the trend, my body is getting weaker, my energy is getting lower, my rage is getting higher, my impatience, my pain, my loneliness is getting higher. These are the areas I'm having repeat chronic challenge with no relief, despite any amount of money, time, effort. These are the stuff that I've tried, and they don't seem to be helping. I've got all my goals and then some. And pain is getting higher. I do not want to live another 20 years like this, and I don't want to eke it out, to peter out into this miserable state, clinging to life. I'd rather die on a high note. So I wanted help. How to die well. And I got some support. But I looked at everything that I had done in the area of spirituality, meditation, personal growth, diet, all this stuff. And I realized that because I was disgusted by the irresponsible adults who had leaned on me emotionally in their bad trips as a child, because I was disgusted with the stereotype of the flaked out, hippie that doesn't pay their bills and all that. Because control And pattern analysis is what had helped me survive through all this insanity. And drugs dull that. I've never been drunk, never want. I mean, I don't want my coping mechanism taken away from me. The one thing I've been able to count on, is to use that to make money, to achieve goals, and to do the best healing I could possibly do. And so I realized I've never looked at drugs or psychedelics. So never had one of those experiences, never been interested. It's a new thing. It's not my world. I don't know where to get them. I don't know what. So I thought I should study that, and I asked for help. Does anyone know about this arena? It's kind of like the one frontier that I've not been interested in, and then it's completely illegal, so there's not a big incentive to expose that. And I got help. I got suggestions around psychedelics, and I got suggestions on how to die from the Human Awareness Institute community. And that's when I started learning, and I wanted to create a ritual to die well, and so I started, reading. There's some good books, and helium is basically what it boiled down to. But because of all the legal ethics, it's so depressing to realize that your own government is trying to create a messy death by just suppressing and all this. And that's when I had a whole wave of betrayal around this death. Now, I'm a strategist. I like to look at the worst case scenario. I like to plan for it, like to be ready, have a contingency plan, and then I can relax and focus on doing it better. In business terms, this is called a constructive pessimist personality, and Bill Gates is a constructive pessimist, always aware of everything that could go wrong, but then rather than giving up, working like hell to see that it doesn't. That's my personality. Look at the worst and then aim to improve it, and work hard, very hard, to do that. I wanted a good death scenario, and that's when all the backlash from my government and all the people, including all my support team, including therapists, licensed and unlicensed healers, where I'm there in my home, and I've developed the mechanism to die with helium, and you're doing energy work and a prayer and setting a beautiful ritual so that it's an honoring of my accomplishments, my beauty, etc., etc. They said, no, we can't expose ourselves to this legally. What if? And I'm completely abandoned. It's like all these people that say they love me, they're more worried about the what ifs, legal repercussions, than honoring a human being who wants to die with dignity in a situation that they can't and won't help, and which I don't know what to do with. It's getting worse, despite enormous investments in money, tests, this, that, and the other. Enormous investments. I'm $250,000 in, and getting worse. And what I'm really concerned about is that as it will reach a certain point where I can't make money, and my lifestyle will collapse, and then it'll be absolute hell, and I can't even afford to die well, and that's terrifying in a country that is so money-driven. So I'm outraged, that basically it's coming down to legal fears in my circle. It's like, you call that love? I'd be there for you. I'm not going to deny you an honorable death. You don't have to pay me. You're a human being. You deserve to die well. If that's your choice and you've explored all your other options and you're going downhill and there's no one there that's going to help you, die beautifully. And I'll be there for you. But no. So this was a letdown. I got the literature, so it's like, okay, looks like dying largely on my own. And feeling abandoned, not a very nice scenario. Part of the reason I want to die to begin with is this kind of cowardice and this kind of sociopathic thing, like, where your own government punishes you. And then I go into the psychedelic arena. I start reading books. It's very educational. Food for the Gods, Acid Test. It's amazing. Of course, the first thing is the differentiation between drugs. What I was particularly not interested in was having short-term highs, an addictive cycle, and then needing more and more of an expensive illegal drug to maintain the high. That is not an intelligent path when you're in chronic pain. But psychedelics are not a high. They're not addictive. And they can lead to breakthroughs. And so I was interested. I read the profiles of Vietnam veterans having breakthroughs in PTSD. I thought, when you're gonna die, it's worth giving anything a try. So I went into that. And a member of the high community, who I had helped a few years prior, said that he'd like to thank me for that help by coming to my house, being my sitter, and supplying me with MDMA, which I could buy the material. It was pure MDMA, not any of the admixtures in ecstasy, which sometimes doesn't even contain any MDMA. And I could use the protocols that were listed and FDA approved for Iraqi veterans with PTSD, which is a sitter, talking in certain things, a 6-hour session, recording it, blindfold, soothing music. And I had a dream. And in my dream, I was going towards the ocean. And I had this little premonition just as I was about to put my foot, one foot in the water, that there was something big there. But I looked around and I thought, it's only a few feet in the water. What can go wrong? And I put my foot in the water, and instantly a huge 30-foot wave came up and swept me up with it, all the way up, and I was up on the pinnacle, and then I woke up as I was about to be dashed down on the sharp rocks, because this was not a sandy beach, this was a rocky, thing. And I thought, this seems like an indication to go gently. And so I used that dream, which I think we have very intelligent parts of us in our non-linear, non-rational state. No harm in going gently, so I asked for a half dose, 60 milligrams, rather than the 120. My first experience, what's wrong with going gently? So I took that. It was quite an amazing experience, but there were some fallout points. One was the fact that this completely opened my heart, but then the man was a very reserved, walled off American, in his attitude, just on the continuum of kind of warmth, engagement, more walled off. So I felt lonely. As these feelings started opening up and these inner aches that were deep inside, I wanted to hold someone. It wasn't sexual or anything. High teaches a fairly good differentiation between sensuality and sexuality. But he didn't want to be engaged there. He said, And I really wanted a friend. And at that time, within the parameters that work with coping with the unnamed, the unnamed PTSD, I did not have a friend as I felt a friend, someone I could share all of these things and who would be empathic and open as opposed to critical, impatient, irritable, not have the time to let me finish, not ask how they could support me, but rather, okay, gotta go, the more of an acquaintance type of dynamic. It hurts. And I didn't have that, and I really wanted that. And he rejected me because he said he had too many friends. The other, he said he didn't want to escalate anything while I was opened on MDMA. And I now see pros and cons, to that. But I was learning so much that after the 60 milligrams, about 2.5 hours later, as it started to wear off, I took a 35 milligram dose. And again, learned so much and, recording the whole thing. And it was getting time, like he'd done I'll be here for 6 hours, then I'm going to leave. And it was going so well, I said, I think a third dose, another 30 or so milligrams would be a good idea. And he said, are you sure? And I said, well, I think so. And so I took the third dose. He left shortly after, and I became incoherent, scared, and desperate. And it wasn't at all like the first or second dose. I couldn't talk clearly. I couldn't think clearly. And later that night, when I'm trying to get back into my body and stuff, I thought maybe a hot bath or something would help. And I wake up with a big bump on my head, and I'm out cold. And this is the first time I've blacked out in my entire life. I've never fainted or blacked out, but I woke up and I'm on the floor, so I realized I did black out. I have this huge bump, and I look, what did I hit? And I realized I'd hit my neck right here on a glass jar. And the glass jar is fortunately very thick, and I realized if that jar had been a little thinner, this is an unusually thick glass jar, it would have shattered under the weight of my body and my head falling hard on it. And that glass would have cut a main artery, and I'd be dead. And I didn't read about this in any of the books. None of the protocols talked about this being a risk. I've taken a lower dose than normal. My sitter, the person who said he has done this hundreds of times. No, nothing about this. And I have a fit. Because I feel completely unsupported and unsafe, and I can't depend on anyone. I can't depend on my sitter. I can't depend on a friend. I can't depend on the books to tell me what could go wrong. And I can't depend on myself because I don't know what I'm dealing with here. And then it gets worse, because when I call the sitter the next morning and talk about, what a panic, how much anger and fear I'm feeling, he doesn't want to hear about it. He said, I signed up for your sitting. I don't want to listen to your emotional stuff. I'm like, you wouldn't be listening to my emotional stuff if you'd either said, don't take the third dose, and then he says, that's what I told you. I told you not to take the third dose. And I rewind the recording, and he's right there. saying, fine, take the third dose. So there's the betrayal that he doesn't want to listen to it. There's the betrayal that he hasn't protected me. There's the betrayal that I'm going through so much new stuff in 24 hours, and for one of the first time in my life is physically in danger. There's the panic that I don't know how to keep myself safe in this kind of situation. And then there's the experience of this heart-opening closing hour by hour and going back into a very dark place that I realize I've been in most of my life. And there's the grief and the panic about that, and then there's no one to talk to, because I need to talk a lot. And I feel like I'm a complete burden in this busy modern world. No one wants to take 3 or 4 spontaneous hours. And yet, how can I plan for this if no book and no professional and nothing can give me a heads up or help me protect myself? So this is terrible. I make it to a high workshop that Friday, and I meet Peter Sandhill. I just needed to get to a safe place was my goal. To manage, to have some people there to support who wanted me there to care for me. And I had an experience of borrowing a yard of dental floss from a team member, only to listen to that team member spend the next 20 minutes making jokes and complaining about how self-centered participants are. How, talking about the fact that for her, a box of dental floss lasts an entire year because she only uses a 6-inch piece. But you give a participant an inch, they'll take a mile. And then the worst thing was that she was saying all of this and making all these snide remarks. I was right beyond the partition, dental flossing my teeth the way I always do with the art of dental floss, and wrapping it through so that each teeth gets cleaned with a fresh bit rather than plaque from one going right into the plaque of the other. I mean, I wanted clean teeth. And she's doing it to a potential lover who rejected me at a cuddle party the week prior, we'd met at a cuddle party. She'd been really interested in me, and as I started talking about some of the things that I needed around PTSD without having words for it in that way, because I still had not received a diagnosis, and I had no idea. So as I'm trying to help her understand how to navigate, because she's interested in me, she blows me off and says she's not interested, which really hurts because I was quite, really wanting to connect deeply. It's very healing to have deep, strong bonds. So it just felt like, one more failure in this arena. And then the team member who's made the commitment to really be of support and on team is just tearing me to pieces to a lover who's rejected me because I borrowed a yard of dental floss. And I just fall to pieces because I'm in so much pain at the way this culture treats one another. I just don't want to keep wrapping the wire tighter and tighter to constrict the emotions, to control more and more and more, to get over all of this unkindness, this insensitivity, this ignorance, this unwelcome sensitivity. And Peter's there. And I cry, and he takes a beautiful amount of time to care for me. And when I hugged him, I felt all this love. I felt my love for him. I felt his love for me. And I remembered when he wanted to explore a romantic relationship 10 years earlier, and I thought, well, maybe it's not so, maybe what was happening was my heart was blocked. and that was the problem. But now MDMA is opening me up. I feel something now in that area. Like this, I can feel cared for, and I haven't felt like that for some time with Peter. And in one of the things that I forgot, I didn't fully go into all the details, but I had tried to talk to Peter about the fact that he was going too fast, about the fact that he wasn't listening, about the fact that he was abandoning my process by going at the speed that he went in our interactions. And he had gotten up while I was asking him to be really present for what I was saying, and he had started crying and left the room. He said, I just can't stay and hear this. And I said, Peter, if you get up and leave, you're betraying me one more time. And that's it. That's your chance. And he got up and left. And so I was like, fuck Peter. But here I'm feeling all this flow. He's very, very kind. Not only that, I learned that he has been taking energy classes on managing states and energy fields and all that. And that this seems to be helping, that as I'm falling apart and not feeling safe being in this workshop, because even the team does not seem to be sensitive and supportive. That's why I came to this workshop. It's not like it's material that I needed to learn. I wanted a safe space, and I'm not feeling that. And Peter does his best to provide it. And I get some hope. I watch what he's doing energetically. I've received lots of different energy work from different practitioners. Some of it is amazing, some of it is okay, some of it I don't feel anything. I was feeling stuff. This was giving me hope. It's like, oh, Peter could be a support person. And that's when I remember that he had wanted to do MDMA together. Now, I don't want that. But I'm thinking, the way Peter's treating me in this workshop doesn't feel like the sociopathic dismissal of all my feelings and stuff the way the high acquaintance who volunteered was doing that. And it wasn't volunteer by my choice. When he said he'd volunteer, I gave him $300, and then I gave him a $400 crystal so that he got $700 for his 6 hours. Money wasn't it. I like balance in relationship, and so. But I didn't feel like he was committed or interested in giving me the support I needed. I felt like I experience so often in American relationships that it's a transactional thing. I'm good for this. Anything beyond that, you're on your own. I don't care what you need. I'm up for this, and I'm not up for anything else. And take it or leave it. And that's not the kind of experience you want when you're going into deep waters to try and save your life. You want someone that actually cares, that actually wants to understand what works best for you and find that point. And so I thought, I don't know anyone else. That's so often the problem in this kind of situation. I don't know anyone else. There's no one being as kind, supportive, and attentive as Peter Sandhill. He seems to have cleaned up his act a lot. Like, he can listen more, I'm not having the problems with it. And he's been going to energy classes and learning different things for a couple of years now. I mean, this sounds, if he's flipped, to a point where he can actually help me as opposed to, do nothing and draw out the worst in me, I'll take it. And so I asked him, I said, Peter Sandhill, I think you could be. You said you'd recommended MDMA. I haven't tried mushrooms. That's, it was MDMA and mushrooms were the two things that seemed like they might lead to a breakthrough from my reading. I said, I haven't tried mushrooms at all. And I have tried MDMA, and there was a major breakthrough, meaning I learned and talked about things in the recording, and I listened to the recording over and over, that I think is worth a year's therapists, from what I can tell. I mean, and I'm not going to go through another year of therapy. At this point, it grates on me no end that I feel worse after 10 years of therapy. And with my exhaustion and stuff, just driving to a therapist feels rotten. And having them do it on their schedule rather than when I need it or have the energy feels stressful and rotten. So there's just so much of a disconnect. But I ask Peter if he'll do a mushroom experience that fixes all the bugs of the last experience. So first of all, you don't leave until I feel safe and say I'm in bed and I feel safe, basically. Are you willing to make that commitment? Yes. 2, we have 1 to 2 hours a day for the next week at least, where we where we follow up and that you want to hear and talk about everything that goes on. Yes. And then we'll assess it at that point. Is that clear? He said, yes, no problem. I think I'm doing good. I'm not going to crack my head if I'm in bed. I'm not going to panic if I'm the one saying, okay, you can go now. And I've got follow-up support, and I don't feel in this crunch of going through an emotional crisis and experiencing that no one wants to be there. So I think I'm doing good. And Peter says, I have a great feeling about this because it's happening easily in my schedule. And what I'm learning in my energy work is if it flows easily, it's kind of meant to be. So this is a good sign. And so Peter shows up. He asked me if I want him to wear this robe or that robe, kind of, if I have a preference, his shamanic garb. I say the white one is fine. And then he wants to get started. And meanwhile, in the week following, I've bought some mushrooms, and I've decided to sample again. I want to get a sense of what I'm dealing with. So I have 1/10 to 1/20 of one mushroom. And I get a buzz and I get an effect. So I think 10 times more is plenty for a first experience. But Peter disagrees. He thinks 3 is minimum, because otherwise I'm wasting my money. And I say 1 is a big deal. I mean, I don't want to go through what I went through before, and this is not the only time in my life I'm going to take mushrooms or something. I mean, if I've had a response that's unique with 1/10 to 1/20, let's go for 1 mushroom. That's a 20-fold increase of what's already created something a little unusual. And and I thought about my dream and this and that. So Peter says, no, 3. I don't want you to waste your money. I'm paying Peter Sandhill $175 an hour. I say, we discuss it, and I say, I'm not taking more than 2. And I remember even that, it seemed such a big amount compared to what I'd eaten. I was taking things out of the pot. He was saying no more, and then I want to drink lots of lime juice to hydrate. And he says, no, don't drink lime juice. It'll make it, it'll dilute the amount. I think good, because I'm not trying to have this, explosive thing. I'm wanting to learn insights and stuff here, and so I start swilling down quarts of lime water, and I had an amazing amount of panic and resistance coming in. And so I talked to Peter a little bit about some of my pain and frustration with therapists. I tried to fill him in. I spent an hour and a half actually walking him around the house, showing him crystals, talking about my experience, my exhaustion, my kind of recent suicide thing. I felt like he's got to know. And he listened and, gave me the time to talk, but didn't ask any questions or say anything, just, continued. And I was very nervous. And he said, "Would you like me to take a rock solid stand for you? Just an absolute stand for your safety and well-being." I said, "I would really like that." And he talked about this in a story with him and his wife, that she really brought her security, and I thought that would really help with the amount of panic and fear that I'm feeling. He made that commitment. I ate the 2 mushrooms, and then we start to see the repeat of the pattern. So about 30 minutes in to the session, he says, "I didn't even tell Sarah that we were doing this. I just told her this would be a normal session because I think it'd be less complicated that way." Which is a repeat of the pattern of inserting me between him and his wife. Because if you are participating in something with legal implications, your wife deserves to know. It's a financial decision. It's a liability. Your wife but also High deserves to know. I'm kind of thinking about this retroactively. At the time, I was just excited to have Peter do this. And the High agreement that Peter makes along with every member on the team is not to escalate a sexual relationship within, in the case of a level 4, a month. And as a facilitator, the agreements are much stricter because of the role, the responsibility, the strong sacred responsibility of the role of being a leader and a resource. Because if a lover in your life goes sour, you may need the support of the High workshops. You may need the support of your community. But you do not have that support if you are at odds with the leader of your workshop and your community. So you need to protect the participants' access to support. That's the primary role of a healer, of a support person, of a workshop, is to be a safe place from which you can take extra risks in your life to grow and to learn and to love with people, knowing that you've got your community, your leader, your healer, your therapist to support you in that process. So it's a very sacred responsibility. And I had not anticipated that this would escalate something because I'm heterosexual, because it hadn't escalated anything with the last sitter. What I did ask Peter, I said, if I'm feeling lonely, I want you to hug me. I'm sick and tired of, all this jargon. I was still reverberating with all the crap, that people couldn't show up and support me in a healthy death because of the law. It just seemed like there's all these arbitrary things that have nothing to do with what I need and what is nurturing. And so I asked him, I said, I'm sick of all this role and protocol. I want you to be a human being with me who cares. I mean, that's what I need more than anything at this time of, opening up and grief and all that. And Peter said he would be. He'd be, he'd just be there for me. Now, what happened in the experience was, full psychedelic effect, all, everything moving around and all that, but I felt absolutely nothing. And I found myself not able to see clearly and stuff. And I kept going through my mind, like, where's the healing? Where's the breakthrough? How is this going to help? What's going to be different? Am I finding anything worth living for? And I wasn't interested in spiraling purple and green lights. It reminded me a lot of a Chinese carnival. And I thought, big deal. It's just spinning wheels. There's no emotion. There's no insight. And so I kept saying, to Peter, I said, not only that, the most valuable thing about this whole experience is being with a man who cares for me. Your love, being with you. I'd frankly be enjoying this more if I wasn't taking mushrooms, and I was just, because so much of the pain is not having a single human being who cares, who understands, who wants to make the time, who's kind. In these most sensitive and vulnerable wounds that are coming up in terrifying ways, suppressed emotions that I can't fully put words to. That's what I want. So I kept telling him, I said, flashing lights, snakes moving around, this, that, and the other. And I told him that I had one 60 milligram capsule of MDMA, that I knew that was a good experience, meaning I'd learned stuff on that first thing. And I wasn't learning anything. I just felt dissociated and a bit empty. I felt like I was moving through all these dimensions and spaces mentally, which I'm very good at, as a dissociated, highly imaginative, highly sensitive mind. I've been to a lot of places through imagination, and I'm not terribly impressed. It's heart-centered love that's the real medicine for me. And it usually comes through a very mature woman who loves her little girl, who really adores herself, and who's kind and in touch with herself, and who extends that love to me. That's the most powerful medicine in my life. And, I do my best to create that. And it's very ephemeral in its potential within modern culture, in my experience. And so, I'm going through that, and at some point Peter suggests, why don't you take the MDMA if you're not having, getting the experience. And about half an hour later he suggests, again, because I'm spacing, and I think it's, okay, let's give that a shot. I'm certainly not getting anything here. And it actually felt like it's a little bit too much, because it's, lots of flashing lights, but no insights. I can just barely put the words together that this is not as important as human love. All these shapes and dimensions are not as important as human love. I take the MDMA, and about 30 minutes later I start channeling, and I get focused. I start verbalizing. When I say channeling, when I write, sometimes I feel like it's just coming through and there's kind of an ecstatic feeling. When I write poetry, again, sometimes that's there. But it's the experience of witnessing myself speaking as opposed to rationally forming the words. So I start channeling in an unusual voice for the first time. I've sometimes had an element of that, like where that was coming from in my writing, but this is the first time that it's coming through where that's the dominant persona. So there's a different voice and it's coming through. It's a great experience. There's very little inhibition and rational overlay. And there's a lot of stuff that I'm seeing, and I'm paying attention, and I'm saying kind of makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. I can see that. I can understand that. And I get very focused on Peter. My love for Peter, and more persistently, I say literally over 100 times in the session, your love is the most important thing. And what I'm saying in that is I'm looking in all of this vast ecosphere of imagination, and I'm really clear that what I'm calling Peter Sandhill, his love for me is the most important thing in this whole thing. And it feels like a bit of a revelation to really get that, that love is the most important thing. And I just keep saying that. And I talk with Peter about his marriage. I do some channeling around that. I talk about, a variety of things. And Peter says, everything you told me I already knew. I then talk about Peter's blind spots. I talk about the fact that what I'm seeing around his eyes is crustaceans, that he's got a 30% blind spot basically. And because again, I'm in an uninhibited and seeing that state, I start tapping his head like this. And say, you've got all this crustacean on your eyes, you've got to open up your seeing. Now this he completely denies. He says, no, I see everything very clearly. And so this tied in a little bit with the pattern of trying after the first wave of sessions to help him see stuff and having him deny it and not seem to acknowledge that there was anything he did inappropriate for the first 10 years. I also, in one of my first openings into the session, tell him, I say, Peter, you really hurt me. 10 years ago in our work, you really hurt me. And he doesn't ask a single question. He doesn't lead into it. Tell me about that. How? What went on? He says, I hear that and I'm ready to move on. I'm ready. Let's move forward now. So he kind of pushes over that. Now, I don't know at the time, again, because I'm still in my own naivete and blind spot, how and why it was so inappropriate to pay a facilitator to suggest that I have my first male sexual experience with him and that I do it in a way that works for him in his marriage, and then that I pay him to take drugs, and without any diagnosis or sense of whether that's terrible for me, because of course in retrospect I can see that would have been about the most traumatic, unhealthy thing I could have possibly done. And it's completely inappropriate to be paying Peter for him to explore the sexual agenda he brought in the way that was most convenient for him, without any questions about my whole feelings and stuff. So it's just terrible healing protocol, just a terrible thing. And he's not asking, again, I think it's a really important permission to ask if someone is willing to be a secret holder with a particular person. Because I had an experience in the high community of a Tantra teacher who asked me, he said, I'd like to have a sexual relationship with you as long as you don't tell my partner. And I said no. And I realized how much that hurt me because I knew his partner. And he's just told me basically that he lies and betrays her and doesn't seem to think much of it. That's what he's just communicated. And he's a Tantra teacher. And what does that mean about the safety of his patients, of his clients, and their relationship? If he betrays his own relationship, who else will he betray? This really got to me, so I confronted him, and I said, you need to tell her about this, or I will. And he threatened my life if I talk about it. And I called the high office. And the person on the phone, who was a friend of his partner, said I'd stay out of it. And this was very disturbing. It's making someone an involuntary secret holder, and I have never lied. I have never lied. Not to a single friend, not to a single partner. I have never cheated. And I've gone out of my way to do the opposite. I won't have sex until expectations and boundaries and context is discussed. Until they know what they need to know to make an informed decision, and I feel like I know what I need to know about their situation, and I don't want someone to cheat on their boyfriend or something like that, because that's not what I'd like done to me. That's not what high is about. You can't have intimacy, which is the high's beautiful way of expressing intimacy. Does it help you see me? You can't have that and have secrets. And so, but I was already too out of it to be in a critical space, but I think it's very respectful to all concerned, basically, to say, may I have your permission to tell you a secret in confidence about that I want you to keep from this person and other people? And I will say no, flat out, because I don't think I should be between someone and their wife. One, I don't want to keep secrets. I don't believe in it. I don't think it's a good idea. I think it destroys the very things that high is about. And so that's just a little aside there. And but I have this complete heart opening with Peter Sandhill in this place. And I have a sense of seeing him and his beauty. And I have a sense of just being free in a way that I've never been. And I feel really close. I feel joyful. I feel happy. I feel gentle. It's a truly sacred experience. It's one that still touches me deeply to talk about. And we come towards the end of this experience, and in my falling in love and teaching, so I'm kind of channeling and falling in love, I start doing some kind of lover healing with Peter, in which I talk about some of his wounds, his pain, some suggestions. I'm just letting this come through. I'm mentally aware of what I'm saying as a witness. I'm happy. It's new, it's different, it's loving. It seems like a good direction. It's certainly not depressed and suicidal. So that's a good sign if you're trying to find a reason to live and have a breakthrough. And at one point it shifts where, rather than me taking the lead to talk about how much I love Peter and how much I need his love, where he takes the lead and talks a little bit about some of our shared experiences, about the fact that what I'm experiencing now is what he felt 10 years ago, about he asked me to lay on top of him. He talked about having an energetic orgasm with me that was really profound, and he asked me to kiss him, and we kissed, and this was certainly the most tender and vulnerable kiss in some ways that I've ever had with a human being, because of the level of awareness and openness. And it wasn't lustful, it was profoundly open, and in that way innocent and very, very beautiful. You know, I really savor, and it touches me, the exquisite beauty of those moments. And as this came down on the other side, I asked Peter if we could talk about how we could engage personally. And this was building on something that came through very loudly in the channeling, which was, Peter, keep money out of this relationship. Let your love be a gift. Money does not belong in this exchange. And, I know it feels lonely to love someone who's charging you to love you. That was a wound I experienced in early life with the channel Lazarus, who talked about loving us more than we could ever know and being our friend and not a teacher and all that. And yet, it was a complete monologue. The relationship with Lazarus is 99% the channeling, and 0.01% anyone talking. And there was no dialogue about what was talked about. There was no dialogue about when the events were held. They were all paid for. So, there's this, and I think that's probably one of the reasons I didn't quite get it is, looking back, it seems very odd. I mean, what friend or lover do you pay to be your friend? I mean, that's not a friend. That's a teacher or professional relationship of some kind. But my whole relationship with the channel Lazarus was a relationship of me paying to listen to him talk, and him never asking how it felt, what I needed, what was good for me, what were my misunderstandings, what did I want to talk about in the next conversation. It wasn't a conversation, it was a monologue. It was a paid monologue called friendship. And in what's going on with Peter, it felt very painful on some level to have an invited biggest heart opening of my life occur, and to fall deeply in love with a man who was charging me $175 an hour. And I asked him to keep money out of it. Now, he said he couldn't. He said, I told Sarah, his wife, this would be a paid session and she's expecting X amount of money. So let's talk about this later. So when I said let's have a conversation about, because he'd escalated, he'd asked to kiss and hugged and talked about these deep experiences. And the channeling that I had done involved an ongoing relationship with Peter. And, I had no way of making sense of what to do about this. I just knew that the highest energy and emotion that I'd experienced consciously in my life was present when I talked about having a personal relationship with Peter. And my response in life with these kinds of things. If I write poetry and the brightest images of the poem is going in a certain direction, I try and transform the outer reality to reflect the inner reality. And my happiness and well-being goes up when I do that. But this wasn't a situation where I hadn't expected any of this with Peter. I hadn't prepared for it. I had told Peter, let me take the lead so that I can have an experience around this. And I'd mostly taken the lead. He'd escalated and taken the lead for a few moments and certainly seemed to be present for that. But I was all set, like, how do we form what's going to be good? And in the channeling, I'd actually talked about the fact that it seemed like our connection would have a catalyzingly positive role on his marriage. And I talked about that, and he, seemed to understand and agree with that, with that possibility. Now, then something very strange and unfortunate took place, because he delayed all conversation. I gave him the money on the basis that I didn't want Sarah to lose out because of our relationship. It didn't feel good to, it felt more like lovers, and it didn't feel healthy to be paying money. It moves into that prostitution terrain, which gets into social, our society's sense of shame and legal issues and all of that. I don't like, that. But I didn't want Peter breaking a commitment to his wife. And so I gave him $1,000. And I also gave him $1,700 of crystals. That part of the channeling was he'd opened up to feel these beautiful crystal energies. And, it's a wonderful energy in that state. But one of the things that I've learned in a study afterwards, which again did not show up in my books at the time, is that one of the ways MDMA works is by suppressing negative caution, suppressing real and actual caution and discernment of negative risk. That one's sense of the risks go down artificially in MDMA. And one of the ways they did that was they would give people not on MDMA a whole line of faces that express the entire range of negative and positive emotion, from hate to anger to rage to joy to love. And the person not on MDMA, as a statistic, saw and understood all the emotions. And the person on MDMA couldn't see the anger and the pain and the fear. They could just, I'm not quite sure what he's doing, or that's a happy person. They basically, the bias is towards the positive. And so I'm not seeing this as a risk. Peter's got a secret with his wife around this, or I'm falling in love with someone who has traditionally never been even close. He's not even been able to listen to me fully. Who hasn't made amends or repaired the damage, 10 years ago, who can't admit a mistake. I'm not looking at that. I'm just feeling like this is the way I want to be feeling. And this is exciting. And so it's exciting to see where this can go. And so he leaves, and we have our first session scheduled for 12 o'clock the next day. And I wake up, and it's dissociating, and it's a lot to process. And my mind is saying, what happened? Am I okay with it? I don't know, but we need to talk it through. And I have a time to wait. And I have found that when I'm in this state, it's a potentially traumatic state. This is difficult terrain for me in relationship. I want someone there when I'm having intense processing and integration. It's one of just the delicate areas that I need to go through in a relationship. And he's not there, and I know he's not there, and I realize that our relationship is in these little boxes, these windows of time as negotiated. And that feels a bit lonely, and that feels a little bit delicate. But I feel like I know, he's a therapist. He's professional. I'm paying him $175 an hour until we negotiate otherwise. And no therapist has ever been late or anything, so I feel like I can hold on until that time. And so I do, and 12 o'clock comes, and there's no call. I try and call Peter, no response. I Skype message him, what's going on? No response. I email him, what's going on? No response. I breathe. I try and practice that open state I just experienced the other day. And I hold on and I breathe and I check my voicemail and I check my phone and I check my email and I check my Skype and I do it again. And 8 minutes come and I think, well, maybe he's just got the time a little bit off, But there's no message. There's no, I'm going to be late. And this, one of the unusual expressions that no one has asked me about in the whole therapeutic protocol, but which has been a big friction point for me, is I can't be friends with someone who shows up more than it's more than 10 minutes late without calling. And I tell people that in advance. I prepare. I say, if you are going to be late more than 5 or 10 minutes, please call and let me know. If you call and let me know, there's no issue, but it's a big deal for me if I'm just left hanging. Now, I feel I have to do that in America because of the casualness around time and communication in social settings. But I do it because I need to, because the relationship suffers if I'm just left hanging. I get so anxious with the unknown. And it doesn't matter how much I like the person, and it doesn't matter what the date is. The date could be a casual sit around in a hot tub. But my anxiety climbs to about a 6 within 30 minutes. And that's just an acquaintance on a normal day. And because I don't expect anyone to know that, because they don't guess it, nobody's ever guessed that, I take it as my responsibility when getting to know someone to tell them this as a protocol prior to a first date so that they know. And then I can decide if they don't honor that, we can just disengage. That's the end of the relationship, because I don't want to be revved up to a 6 in anxiety. And I have no control. I can't stop that process. It's just something I have to respect and have observed, and it destroys relationships. And so my job is to do my part and communicate the boundary, and then other people can decide if the relationship is important enough to honor that boundary, and if it's not, that's the end. And if it is, they do, and they do a good job. And so that's the deal. But I've never had to tell a therapist, it's really important you actually show up for your appointment on time. And I've never had an experience like this. I've never channeled before. I've never had a psychedelic. I've never combined MDMA with a psychedelic. I've never had such a mega dose. I've never fallen in love with a man. I've never had this intimacy with a facilitator or therapist. I've never paid someone. There's so much roiling beneath the surface in all this. And 8 minutes come, and I start breathing intensely. And 10 minutes come, and I lose it. This fucked up human being. How could they possibly be the one therapist at the one moment that I most need grounding and security. How has he managed to blow this on the first day? Didn't he hear the hour and a half of agony? Doesn't he know therapeutic training? Doesn't he practice appropriate communication around commitments? This is a teacher on healthy relationships who's taught me, along with his peers, this kind of clear communication. And we have an appointment. And it's $175 appointment. And there's not a word, nor is there an answer. It's like it doesn't get more flaky than that. And at that point, I realize I can't trust this man. And I lose it. The amount of hate, the amount of despair, the amount of grief, the sadness that this entire beautiful state is collapsing around me in the reality, the mundane reality, that I can't trust a single human being to respect my boundaries. And by the time he gets around to showing up in 20 minutes, I am so furious, so hurt, I don't want to look him in the face. And we spend the next hour, the session basically, before I can even look at him. I'm just so hurt. I just vent. And it's so painful to go from this huge high to one of the lowest points in my life. And the contrast is enormous. I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of % contrast. And it just collapsed in a matter of a couple of minutes. I just feel so sad. So sad that I'm not seen, so sad that I'm not respected, so sad that I'm expressing my worst, my most reactive anger to the person I had just loved the most the day before. And that I'm paying for it, And we finally, after an hour, he was very good. Once he got on the phone, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm just holding your little boy. I get it, I'm sorry. And once I felt like I could express every bit of impact and all of the grief around it, and that he wasn't going to attack me or abandon me, which is, of course, the fear, because most people will. That's the sad thing. When you respond or react to something in a way that they don't understand, regardless of the reason, most people will attack and abandon. And that's part of the wound of PTSD, because you do, in areas, respond more than you would normally. And no one does understand. And so it's a common rewounding in this kind of situation in my life, to be attacked and abandoned for expressing the very real intensity that is evoked by someone's insensitivity that I often don't have the opportunity or the language to put into words. So this is a big deal, and we make it through that. We get on the phone, and we start to talk about it. And I believe Peter hasn't talked about this part of things despite my asking him. I know that he's talked about, at some point in this stage, feeling absolutely terrified, like he was in over his head and didn't know stuff. And I heard that from Ann Watts, that Peter was terrified in this thing. And it's like, well, why didn't I know? But he started doing a better job of showing up for the session. And a week later, I was planning on going to Thailand, which is the most heart-centered country I know of. As I can't stay in high workshops all the time. I wanted to have a healing environment. And one of the things that Peter had said to me during the beginning of the session was I was talking with him about a woman that I had met a week ago. And it was a Thai woman. And Peter said, "Are you going to marry her?" And I said, "Well, I mean, I just known her a week and she seems like completely uncompatible on a logistical level. But she is kind to me, and she's read one of my books, and she, I sent her a book, and she loved it, and and she really wants to stay in a relationship." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, it's funny, when I look at YouTube, one of the things that you can do in certain forms of energy work is some form of psychic seeing, where you see something." So I knew Peter had been doing this energy work, and I knew some of it was very good because I'd experienced it. So he said, "When I look, inside, there's a possibility of you marrying her." And I said, "Well, there's a possibility you and I can, develop the things that we explore that." And he said, "Yeah, that's true, but there's a possibility of you marrying her. And when I look at it, it's the brightest future, like of all the stuff that I can see around you in your life, you and this woman, Weepa, it's the brightest future that I can see for you." And, and I said, "Well, it seems crazy. I mean, she's a student, she's got a government job, she has no time, she's this, that, and the other. She's part of a traditional family. She doesn't want to have any sex before marriage. She's a virgin. There's all this, it's one of the most incompatible relationships that I've ever explored. We're just talking on Skype and I've known her a week." I said, "Well, that's what I see." And this relationship, which came very close to ending a couple of times, just hung in this balance by a thread. And I started working with Peter because he was the one that had this vision of this being the most brilliant future. Now, who doesn't want that? And I'm looking to make changes. And I've been very successful in my life, and it's always been around pattern analysis and control discipline, meaning a discipline of implementing a controlled, intelligent pattern based on pattern analysis, which is my coping strategy, my survival. It got me through childhood, adolescent trauma. It's allowed me to achieve thousands of goals. It's not easy. It's not spontaneous. It's not emotional. But it's very effective. It's kind of working with reality on the level of physics as opposed to emotion. And the pattern looks absolutely terrible in this relationship. Like, there's nothing flowing about it. That's my analysis. But I'm also trying to find a basis to be alive. That isn't just the fatigue of having to control and manage everything. And so I'm taking seriously what Peter's saying about this woman being the most brilliant future. And I'm trying to look and see what can I find to validate that. And she's an exceptional communicator. That's her one great strength. And she is there. And she's interested in my books, which most Thai people, they're not very mental oriented, which is one of the things I love about them. She's very mentally oriented. And so at these points when this relationship hangs on a thread, I consult Peter and he coaches us over the next month to keep staying in a relationship, giving advice, like try and engage her family. And I keep saying, this seems terrible. Like, I've never experienced so much pain. And he's like, well, for the relationship to succeed, you need maybe 2 of her family members. And I was like, who, Peter? None of them speak English. They're busy. They're not interested in me. Like, I feel completely out of my depth here and nervous. I'm in this miserable town. Her family is going to get shamed if she holds my hand in public. I suddenly learn that it's a Thai tradition to pay the father $26,000 in this case to marry her. I don't want to marry her, but she won't even hold my hand without being married. This is just this is the most incompatible. Well, all I can say is this is the most brilliant relationship I can possibly see in your future. It's like, okay, I'll give it another shot. So I work with Peter, and one of the things that I realized looking back is Peter started avoiding the stuff about us. Anything that was at all about our session, the falling in love, didn't want to talk about it. It was uncomfortable. He had changed the subject, whatever, but he loved talking about WIPA. And so, retrospectively, and then learning after the fact that he was terrified and something or other, I think that if he could get me into a relationship with someone else that took my attention far away from him, that he would just feel so much better. And I experience this, like every time it's about WIPA and stuff, he's totally there, supportive. He'd answer the phone, at 8 at night, when his son was doing this, going way out of his way to support this relationship. But it's a relationship that should never have happened. All the pattern analyzing are exactly why it shouldn't have happened. I didn't want to get married before I could hold someone's hand. I didn't want to support her in lying to her family because her family believed in that and she did, but they, this and that and the other. I didn't want her to lose this job. There's this huge story about this, how she tried to get it for 2 years, how she did this, she was rejected, she did all this stuff. She finally got this job that allowed her to support her family at this house at this government agency and stuff. And the job had no time for relationship, which is one of my biggest deal breakers. It's why I was over in Thailand to begin with, to find someone that put relationship before work. Not in a mental sense that that's the way it should be done, but as a coping mechanism, as an awareness that because the PTSD relates to early childhood bonding in the 0 to 7 range, and because every relationship reenacts in a fractal pattern, a replica of that first bonding with the mother and father, and that didn't happen, and it was painful. It's a very delicate thing for me to start and open up and love someone, particularly after being re-traumatized multiple times within the high community because lovers didn't understand or wouldn't respect agreements or boundaries and that thing, and I ended up being abandoned in really vulnerable, regressed child ages that happen with PTSD, which I couldn't explain because none of my therapists diagnosed, none of my therapists asked the questions. So it's this very painful scenario. And that's starting to happen with WIPA because regardless of what I need emotionally or otherwise, first she's doing this, then she's doing this, she's completely bound up in this very high society culture. And I'm exhausted and I don't have a ton of money. If I pay her family this $26,000, that's a lot of my savings cushion coping with all this stuff. But then I'm going to need $90,000 to manage the full costs of marrying and bringing her over to the US, which means going into debt, which is not what I want when I'm at suicidal levels of exhaustion and this and that and the other. And it just doesn't make any sense. And yet every time I ask what is my only primary support, the only kind of, quote, sane, if you can call it that, person outside this scene, because to a Thai person this is all completely normal, because that's how Thais do things in upper class society. But to me, it's all insane. You know, you can't hold your fiance's hand without your family being shamed, and these people call that culture or friends. I mean, what do you mean? I've had several Thai lovers where we've made love and, you know, held hands and all that, and there was none of this. Although that's lower society, you know, but in the Thai society, you know, the upper class, you know, it's all judged on this and this and this. It's like, I don't want anything to do with that. I want nothing to do with that. I hate that. It's insane. It doesn't make any sense. How can you marry me before you're even seen my house? You don't know what it's like to live with me. I mean, we can get a divorce then. It's like, Peter, I mean, you following all this? Yeah, all I can say, the most beautiful future in your life. Of course you want that. And this brings me to a point of seeing, just kind of as an aside here, because having spent about $120,000 with people doing various forms of energy work and stuff like that, you know, the kind of stuff that Peter's doing, I've had probably 600 muscle testing ways of seeing. I've had psychic seeings, I've had visions, I've had my own. Other people have had theirs. Peter was having his. And then there's constellation therapy, which is one of the things that I turn to help with my trauma with the high facilitators that's coming up. And just as an aside, I can't tell that there is any statistical difference, and there is a lot of pain with putting any kind of weight or certainty on what seems to be about a 50-50 statistic. Now, I know there are astrologers, seers, you know, muscle testers, and of course, if it works, I want to see what they know. I know we all have unconscious knowledge that is not integrated and that has relevance. But the reality is, as I look at it, I'm with a woman for the last 9 months who's been the most positive, healthy influence in this terrain that I could possibly ask for. And the shaman that I've paid $100,000 to over the last 10 years to do more than probably 600 muscle testings in all kinds of situations. Oh, I get a this on this and this. And I have included that in, you know, probably 20 different lovers over that same period. Oh, your soul. Let's see, your soul isn't quite into this woman. It doesn't seem like this is a good relationship for your soul. Your higher self could go either way. Your physical body likes her. Now your mental body, not so much. Your emotional body, yes. Overall, I'm getting a yes on this one. Or it goes the other way. And I'm just trying to, that's one version of it. Then there's the astrology versions of this and that. I've gotten probably 30 to 40 bits of relational advice. Now, from seers of different kinds. This is the seeing of Peter, which I'm giving the benefit of the doubt because I want something new, because despite my pattern recognition stuff, being in a suicidal state after achieving all your goals and stuff is not what I'd call success. So I can depend on my pattern recognition to deliver goal success in a wide range of areas and to anticipate probabilities in a wide range of areas. But I obviously can't depend on that to create a healing, loving state that I want to live in, because I failed at that. So when one is in a vulnerable situation, one's much more inclined to defer, to give someone else the chance when they express certainty. And, Peter expressed certainty that he saw things clearly. When I told him I thought he was 30% fuzzy, Peter expressed certainty that, WIPA was this optimal future. I didn't have any certainty. I'm trying to integrate all this. And so I bowed at these points. Yeah, and to add to it, WIPA had a seer friend. That's where, WIPA had a seer, a community member who was kind of a little bit of an elder in her community. And that person was telling WIPA, give Dane another chance. Go, respond to that email. Go do that thing you don't want to do. And so WIPA's in the same boat where I'm the opposite of what she wants. I'm the opposite of her culture, but she's got this elder that's saying, go on, I have a good feeling about Dane. He's a good man. Go meet him at the airport. Go do this. And then I've got the same thing. And Peter's saying, it's the most luminous thing. And I'm sharing this with WIPA, and she's sharing back. And I'm saying, well, we've got two seers. It's kind of a big thing. And then there's odds and ends. Like WIPA has never fallen in love. She's had plenty of rich suitors in her upper class thing. And they've courted her for months, and then she said, I've just never felt anything. So she's quite old, 36 years old for a Thai woman. And she's never fallen in love, and people suit her, court her for 4 or 5 months, and then she just says, I don't think you should waste your time. I'm not feeling anything, and off they go. And so, but for me, she fell in love with me reading my book. Well, that sounded significant. And then there's this, and then she's the best Thai communicator, which isn't saying a lot, since many of them just write a few sentences and almost no one speaks English. But she writes very, very well, and so I'm trying to piece it together and give her seer a chance to support her to connect with me, and give me a chance. But it's not looking good. I literally have the worst visit of 8 visits to Thailand on every level, relationally, sexually, emotionally. I feel devastated. It turns out that WIPA is quite sociopathic. She's not in touch with her feelings, which is why she fell in love with me reading a book and hasn't fallen in love with a single human being. She's very much the opposite of what's been medicinal for me. And she has no experience because she's never had a relationship. And the culture is the opposite of what I need. I need warm, nurturing, kind empathy. She's got terrified, culturally uppity energy where you can't hold your hand and this is the Thai way and you can't do that. And it's all over the place. Oh, you can't do that with salt. Salt means this in Thai culture. And it's like, give me a break. I can't do anything. It's like, WIPA, why the hell are you interested in me? I love everything about you. No, you don't. You don't like the way I do salt. You don't like the way I eat rice. You don't like the fact that I want hold your hand. You don't like the fact that you don't like anything about me. And this was the craziness, and this went on. And so I'm in pain. I'm getting re-traumatized. And Peter's telling me to hang in there. And eventually it just collapsed. I went home and in exhaustion lay on my back for an entire month. And WIPA did the same. Despair, heartbroken, not wanting to eat, not wanting to work, confused. Why did her seer say this? Confused. Why has she fallen in love with such an inappropriate person? I have no idea. I told Peter, I'm just not going through with this. Oh, well. I said, Peter, you have anything to say about this? How this was the best future? He said, well, that's just what I see. And he left it there. He still sees it. But it's up to you. If you don't want to take your best future. And this is kind of why I'm bringing my bit of data to this, because I'm very open to anything esoteric that works. Meaning I've had energy workers that can heal back spasms like that. I've had plenty that don't. But the ones that do, when you got a back spasm, call them. They can do it on the phone. I've had energy workers that can bring an exalted lifting of stress and healing. They can't clear back spasms. So I've learned there's something to this, and you got to find out what it is, basically. And it's such a vague, nebulous thing. I mean, energy worker, can you get anything vaguer than that? It's like saying TV channel, but not knowing which one. There's 500 channels. They all do different things. They all have different strengths. They don't know what they are. So I've got to figure it out. And so, I figured out Peter doesn't know what he's going through. But I also felt, the hurt, the anger, the lack of humility, that I'm in a very vulnerable time. And Peter is not presenting his gifts in what I would call an appropriate, healthy, and safe manner. And that would be something like this. Dane, I see this. I don't know exactly what it means. I don't think you should do what I see just because I see it. I see something. I believe there's a truth in that. But this is just one thing. I'm not there. It could be on a spiritual level you're quite aligned, but on a logistical level it's atrocious. It could be that were you Thai, that you'd be soulmates, but since you're not Thai and you're in this state, it's disaster. It could be that if you didn't have PTSD, I don't know what it means, but it is something to think about, and I would trust your own judgment if you've had success with that primarily, and just be open to this. But don't, beat a dead horse just because I see this. I don't have a lot of experience. I don't have a history of seeing things about people's relationship and knowing what percentage is actually true. I don't know the whole balance. Please focus on what's good for you. I'm your friend. I want your well-being. And what you're describing sounds terrible. And I'm really sorry that I'm a part of that. That's a human and kind of humble way of sharing something. And I think that's appropriate, but that's not what he did. And that's not what my other shaman did. So I'm with a woman who my shaman absolutely said was a no, and who's been the best thing, that I could possibly ask for. And I spent more than 6 months on again and off again with Weepa, thrust back into the relationship because I can get very isolated with PTSD. And Weepa has always been at her best when we're the farthest away. So when I've said that's it, we're through, and a few weeks has passed, she's an angel. So when you've got absolutely no one, when you're re-traumatized, when you're in a state that needs help, and you've got a good communicator that says we can be friends, whatever, I found myself starting. And yet that relationship, it cost me $30,000. It cost me a month in bed. It cost me some of the biggest emotional, relational pain of my life. And it cost Weepa a doctorate degree that she suspended, the job that she'd spent 2 years trying to get, the integrity with her family, and the first heartbreak and severe incapacitating depression in her life. That's what we paid to pursue Peter's "this is the best thing," and her seers saying, Weepa was saying, I don't want to, Dane wants to have a sexual relationship and see how it is. He likes to be relaxed about this. He wants to spend some time, not have a lot of pressure. He's in a sensitive place. I don't even want to hold his hand. This is not good. Well, her seer, her advisor is, well, go give it a chance. Go give it a chance, which is exactly what I keep hearing. I brought in other therapists trying to work on this from different angles. One therapist said, oh, you can't succeed with WIPA unless you work with your mother. I recontacted with my mother. None of that helped at all. Now I had my mother in the mix, muddying things up in ways. And I'm just sharing this because it's one of the things that I've gotten really clear of in all this process. Seers in any form have never been as useful or reliable as common sense, day-to-day experience, and looking at the logistics and the patterns. And so I don't think it's appropriate for seers to be using their influence more than it seems to be added up with, because Peter's not an idiot. My shaman who's been working at this for 10 years isn't. You know, the astrologers and all that, they're not bad people, but they're not around. Peter wasn't around to pick up the pieces. When I called Peter flat on my back and I said, now Peter, can we have this conversation? The conversation you said, let's talk about that later, when I said right at the end of the session, I'd like to talk about our personal relationship. I'm now home, I'm flat on my back, I've got time, and I've just separated from WIPA. I can't, could we have that conversation? The conversation that's good for my sanity, so grounded, clear, follow-up, clear boundaries, expectations. He said, well, all I can say is that's the best future for you, and let's talk about it later. I'm really busy for the next 2 months. Could you follow up with me in 2 months? Okay. I lay flat on my back and recuperate from taking Peter's advice, giving him that benefit of the doubt, paying him $175 an hour for a month of hell, as he's, and I don't understand it, because I would never advise a friend to do what Peter suggested. And so I feel in a certain way lucky that I've gotten this, at least at this point. I think there's always going to be times when we're uncertain, when we're hesitant, when we want to feel like it was meant to be or something like that, and turn to someone on the outside. But I think the smartest and wisest people on the outside are going to say, this is what I can see. Take it with a grain of salt. Do what works for you. Ask yourself, if you were really loving and kind to yourself, what would you do? And I would not have canceled with another very nice woman and gone through this ordeal with WIPA that hurt WIPA as much as it hurt me. I gave WIPA a few $1,000s to help, and I did my best, and I apologized. I said, WIPA, I was in crisis. I took Peter's advice. I did my best, but the reality was, if I'd been thinking and followed that, you wouldn't have experienced all this nightmare. Because I've had a number of relationships. You haven't. This was your first. Had a number of relationships. I have a good head on my shoulder for getting a sense of what can go wrong and is it a good fit and how to deal with that. And it was perfectly obvious from the beginning that you were just about the opposite of what I needed for my well-being. And you've fallen in love with me the way I've fallen in love with Peter. But Peter is the opposite of what's good for my well-being. And I am the opposite of what's good for your well-being. And now I'm all dealing with the grief and stress with Peter and his handling of this. And so and now you're dealing with that with me. And that's Peter was my facilitator. He was my therapist. He is a paid professional whose ethical responsibility is to see that my well-being increases in his care or to refer me to someone with more competence. And he has done neither. My responsibility as someone with more experience is to see that your well-being is increased. And unfortunately, I've been swayed by your desire to hang on and give it a chance, by your healer and by Peter. There's been no voice of sanity in this situation. And I'm really, really sorry. And so I've got that, pain on my hands that someone has gotten hurt because I chose to follow inappropriate advice in my, big push to find something new, something I didn't know, to do things differently. Insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. I know I can't do my life exactly the way I've done it before and expect it to magically change. But when you don't know what you don't know, when you don't know what you're doing wrong, how do you make the change? And so I chose to lean on Peter's guidance, since Peter is not wanting to die and and doing very well, it seems like. I even thought maybe I'm making a mistake by being so honest. I've never lied to a person in my life. I thought the facilitators always said the truth. Here it is, Peter's saying I didn't tell my wife something very basic. Is that why I'm having so much difficulty? Because I always talk about uncomfortable truths, things I know the person may not want to hear, but for that very reason I think they deserve to hear. They need to know everything so they can make good decisions. They can make informed decisions. So this went on for 6 months with Peter delaying things. I got sad. I began to feel sick in my stomach. And I got images in my my poetic mind, the mind that I write poetry from or see dreams in. Those images were sickly, like babies wrapped in cellophane being suffocated, rotting meat. And I feel like this has something to do with Peter, but I can't figure it out. I need help, and he won't talk to me. He's saying he's busy for months and months. It's now 4 months, and he's still busy. I don't like disrespecting people. The whole thing feels painful. I asked him to take money out of the relationship. He never has. I asked him for help. I said, I need about 9 months integrating this experience. Before, I negotiated the week. Coming out of the channeling, in the 10-hour session, I said, I need about 9 months. This is a major shift in my personality. I have so much to integrate. I need about 9 months, and I need your time. And he said nothing. And I asked him to explore the relationship, and he said later. And so it's a repeat where this time I'm being more proactive. 10 years ago, I didn't know what I needed. This time I'm getting more of a sense of what I needed. Then he didn't ask and didn't give me what I needed. This time I'm asking, and he's deflecting or saying nothing. But what I need exactly that. I need a lot of conversation. I need to be directly dealing with someone who has the courage and the maturity to discuss what happened and integrate it And if, as it seems, Peter did a reversal of course without telling me because he decided it wasn't a good relationship for him, I need to know that immediately. I need to know, Dane, I'm really sorry. In your paid session, I lost it and encouraged you, and you've had this profound emotional experience with me. It wasn't appropriate. I broke my high agreements. I escalated a romantic relationship, and I'm your facilitator. I broke the commitment with my wife, and I included you in that secret, and that's completely inappropriate. I lost it. I wasn't thinking. You're absolutely right. Money should not be a part of this. I've played with a spiritual awakening. I haven't had the integrity with myself, with you, with Hai, or my wife. And that's creating psychic tension. You're sensitive. You're going to pick that up. This isn't healthy for you. You need to know what it is. I need to apologize. And let's find how you can process this with a safer person. There's only one thing that's important: your well-being, your sanity, your well-being, and an apology. And no cost for this abuse. And let's go back and talk about, you said that what really hurt you 10 years ago. What was that? I still don't get it, or I get it and I'm really sorry. And, you shouldn't be hurt for taking that risk to trust me. Let me give you your money back. Let me get you some good help. Let me learn from it. And please forgive me, and please, show me what was going on. Obviously, I didn't try to hurt you, but I get it. That never happened. Instead, as I emailed Peter gifts as part of my part of the lover experience, he didn't open them and didn't receive them, and then got snarky when I asked a few weeks later, have you checked? Well, how was that gift? Oh, you've ruined it. You've ruined it because that's not a gift. I don't want to look at those right now, and so I felt my gifts rejected. And then one was ignored completely because I said, okay, I'm going to give him a gift and I'm not going to say anything. I never heard a single word in 6 months. I said, I think it's really important that I said, you've got a gift with energy, but I've got a gift with words. I said, I want you to grow in this dynamic too. You're not communicating what you need to be communicating. You're avoiding my kind of intelligence. You need to be putting things into more words. I invite you and ask that you do that. And he ignored the email. And this began a pattern of him ignoring all my emails. And he didn't say, I'm going to ignore your email. And I followed up and I met with him briefly to give him the crystals that he came to pick up, the $1,700 of crystals. And I said, Peter, have you got boundaries? Like, what's going on? Can we talk about this? And he said, I'm gonna do some work this afternoon. And I said, how about we talk on your drive home? He said, no, I don't want to do that. I said, can we talk now? He said, no, I gotta go. I said, do you have any boundaries? Is there anything you're not telling me? He said, no boundaries, nothing. I send him 2 emails that day. He just completely ignores them. Period. So this began Peter's control of silence and no communication, without agreement, without closure, without anything. And that's when the pictures started to form. And I got worried because I know these pictures do not mean well for anyone. I mean, it doesn't matter what they mean, the meaning isn't good. Babies wrapped in cellophane, rotting meat. I've never had pictures like that. I've never had intuitions like that. And I know it's around Peter. So since he won't talk to me, since he's constantly busy, but he's left in this one, he said, if you really need me, I'll do a session with you. So I said, Peter, I'd like to do a session with you. I pay him $175 an hour to listen to a recording of me trying to channel and come from that same place again and asking him for grace and cooperation. I said, Peter, we are having a significant impact on each other's lives. This is going to affect thousands of people. Please bring your love, your grace. Please give me support at this time. I said, I ask for your support and your grace. I ask you to be a king. That was part of my channeling, to learn to champion, to take a stand, to be of service for the people you're ethically and morally bound to protect and lead. And he said nothing. I said, will you do it? He said, I'll think about it. He never followed up. This felt terrible. I felt like I'm constantly being run around. I'd asked him to take money out of the relationship. He didn't. So I thought, well, let's play around with it in reverse. Let's give him $900. I gave him $900. I said, you're stuck in this whole money thing. My channeling guidance kind of said this would open things up. How about some money? Never done anything before. Let's see how it feels. He said, I'll think about it. 3 days go by. No communication, same dynamic. I again get insecure. It's like, wait a minute, I am not going to just be blown off indefinitely about this. I mean, I've never given anyone $900. So I said, Peter, let's have some framework here. I know you just like to ignore communication, even though you're a communication coach. But this doesn't feel good to me. So I would either like a clear commitment to you that you respond within a week and we have a clear sense that this is a win-win and it feels good to both of us and it does open up things up, or if it's ambiguous and stuff, just return the money, because I have plenty of things I can do with $900 other than go into a vacuum and feel weird about it. And he said, that's not a clean gift. This doesn't feel good at all. And he sent the money back. I said, okay, but again, the message is my gift and my way of giving it isn't good enough. And it still feels shitty. And I usually do closures with relationships that are feeling rotten. And so I feel like, this feels absolutely shitty. I've been stalled out indefinitely. Peter's never wanting to have this conversation. He asked to have a little bit later. It's the only sane and intelligent thing to do is to have clear understandings and a container for an energy that's this charged. I need that. I think Peter needs it too. It's a joke that it's now 6 months later and Peter's not talking about this. And he's set to keep saying later, later, later indefinitely. It's a joke. I said, I need closure. Peter's refusing to talk off the clock. So I said, Peter, I'd like to schedule a time of closure. I said, if you're not willing to talk things through, this feels terrible to me, let's have closure. He said, yeah, I'm not willing to. I said, okay, let's have closure. I will pay you $175 for an hour to wrap things up. And in that time, I talk about the images, I talk about what's painful, I talk about the miscommunication, and he just says nothing. No apology. I said, it feels absolutely miserable that I and Weepa have both had one of the most painful experiences of our life, and you just keep saying this is the best future and all that. It's just feels really painful, and I'm scared about these images and stuff. And he has no apology. And I say, Peter, do you not even see that not just disappearing in this kind of context is inappropriate? I mean, you didn't say, how do you feel if you just ignore my emails? I don't accept that from anyone. The only reason I'm going along with all this is this whole effort to give this new way a new chance. You've said you love me, you've said this and that and the other, and I have bent over backwards and paid you for it. And it just feels painful. He says, well, I can see how not communicating to you would do this. Now, all this is on email record. I mean, the 10-hour recording, he initially said, anyway, it's all on email, it's all on recording, phone calls are recorded and all that. It's just part of my protocol of staying sane. And I try and end it. I send him his final money. And I go through another couple of months and it just feels rotten. The images don't go away. I smell that, it feels like that meat is putrefying. It just feels dense and yucky, and I feel like I've been left with it all. A much denser version of what happened 10 years ago, where I feel like I'm left feeling like shit. And I write to him and I said, this isn't feeling closed or right at all. And he said, Dane, this is so one-sided. This is not right for me. This is so one-sided. You have got to go and do your work. And this feels terrible. I sit with it a few days, and a few days later I'm driving home and I have this first spontaneous weeping experience in my life. I just explode in grief. And I can't drive safely. And I say, this is not right. I don't know, I can't put my finger on what it is, but nothing I've said I've needed is happening here. I'm having some of the most miserable experiences of my life as a result of hiring Peter Sandhill, yet again, following his guidance that this was all meant to be because it fit easily into his schedule, following his guidance around WIPA, following his decision to just ignore emails, following his decision to ignore my request for integration and help, following his decision to delay what I wanted to talk about immediately for 6 months, paying him because he refuses to engage off the clock, which seems very inappropriate and hurts in and of itself. And I don't know what to do with this. And now my life is threatened because I can't drive safely. This is not right. So I write to Peter, I need to talk with you immediately. Of course, he's not in communication, he doesn't. I write to Jason, the head of HI, I need to talk. I feel completely unsafe and overwhelmed this evening. I am not safe. I am in crisis. No response. I make a long 45-minute recording going into all this stuff. And I send it to every single facilitator. I said, please help me. I need to be held and I need to talk. I don't feel safe. I can't drive safely. I don't know what's going on here, but I need help. And so that leads into the next wave of this pattern. So I would call this pattern one of kind of a certain amount of naivete, the same boundarylessness that was there in the first session inappropriately, a betrayal that puts me in the middle between Peter and everyone. Because, in our culture, Peter's the bad guy right now. No one's looking at this, no therapist, no psychotherapist, no healer, my therapist, no participant is looking and saying, I wish Peter was my therapist, because he's embodying a pattern that is profoundly destructive, ill-informed, and unethical. And he's hurt someone in a very vulnerable way. And he doesn't have the maturity, the ethics, or the clarity to make amends on his own, or to see that the person he's hurt gets help. And finally, he's shaming, in a much more overt way than 10 years ago, he's shaming me by saying, why don't I do my work when I'm not the one not asking for help? I'm asking for help in exactly the way that I need it. I'm not the one being paid. I'm paying to ask for help. I've done an extraordinary amount of work. And I've done all the work in this kind of dynamic while Peter has avoided. I'm not the one not responding to email. I'm not the one ignoring. I'm not the one putting myself forward as a professional at $175 an hour. I've done the work to make all that money that I've paid to Peter Sandhill. And so he's overtly shaming me, saying, nothing wrong over here. This is an unbalanced relationship. In other words, I've just been taking from Peter Sandhill all the money I gave him, all the burdens, all the emails I've been writing that have been completely ignored, completely taking. Peter's over there just being used, having to be paid, having to ignore emails, having to feel things, having to think, He's being used. And this is, of course, the opposite of the situation by most objective analysis that I've encountered. And it's completely inappropriate, and it's an escalation. And the trouble is, when you take a really deep psychedelic, particularly for the first time, there's a rebirthing process. You excarnate, and as you come back in, it's like being born again. And I'm being born into this toxicity. I'm being born into Peter's blind spot. I'm being born into his terror. I'm asked to carry the stuff that he needs to deny to feel sane and safe. And I'm asked to go crazy in order to do that. And this is what's most wrong. And it happens in about a third of therapeutic situations when they get out of their depth. That's my experience. That about a third of therapists, when they get out of their depth, and in my working with them, I'd say a good chunk of them do to some extent. About a third of them will, in a direct or indirect way, basically say it's your fault. Other people have improved working with me. You're not improving, or you're not happy, that's your fault. Take some responsibility, basically Peter's line. But this is not this isn't medicine, particularly for a shamed child that has gotten that message first from his parents, who abused them and then shamed him. Then by Lazarus, the channeled entity, who said, you create your own reality. That's the big thing in a lot of the channeling. It's like, you create your reality, moment by moment. No ifs, ands, or buts. By your thoughts, your imagination, your beliefs, your choices. Everyone around you is an illusion. Your parents who are abusing you, they're just illusions. You're doing that to yourself. And you need to work on your payoffs, and you need to sort out your beliefs and stuff like that. And if you do that, the reality just changes. And 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, I spent over 1,000 hours meditating, doing all that Lazarus programming. And my parents abused me and my siblings throughout that 4-year period. A 4-year period in which Lazarus over and over and over again said, you are creating your own reality. And in which my father even added to and said, yeah, you're creating me abusing you like this. Isn't that what Lazarus said? This is absolute spiritual abuse. And of course, Lazarus in his monologue isn't available. So I wrote to Jack, the channel. You know what Jack said? Dear Dane, I do not have any time in my life for another friend. I want to devote all my time to my existing intimate friends. Therefore, I will not read your letter. I didn't say I wanted an intimate friend. I want there to be some channel where toxic impact from a channeled entity who claims to be the most enlightened presence to have ever touched the planet, one of Lazarus's few things he said about himself or themselves, And if Lazarus won't listen in a monologue, how about jack the channel? No. And I'm creating Jack not listening to my email, just like I'm supposedly creating Peter disappearing and all that, and all this stuff. So you've been shamed by your parents. You've been shamed by Lazarus. Periodic shaming from therapists. Plenty of shame from the culture that all says, basically, you're free now. We have no influence. You're completely in control of your life. It's all up to you. Just go do it. If you're a winner, you'll succeed. And then, Peter adding to the toxin. Do your work. It's all up to you. Nothing to do with me or my training or my ineptitude or my terror. None of that. It's so one-sided. And I knew this hurt me deeply. I felt enraged. I felt grief. It felt like a beautiful dream that I wanted to explore was being taken away from me systematically by the person I'd asked to help me and paid to do so. By the person that said they loved me, but yet again was leaving me in a worse state. And so I wrote to the facilitators. I explained the whole thing. I asked for their help. I said, I don't think Peter knows what he's doing. He needs help here. Can you help him, please? This is not how a facilitator should behave at High. And I asked for their help with me. And this was the beginning of the third wave of the pattern, which I'll talk about in the next segment, because it's important to see how these patterns fit together layer by layer and understand how they self-generate at bigger and smaller scales and who gets hurt by them and why. So at the conclusion of this video, I want to honor that on some level, Peter stuck his neck out to give me an experience that I asked for. He did it in a way that hurt me deeply. I'm sure it wasn't an intention, but he was one of the few people I could turn to at that time and did turn to. And the video that I'm making now, the understanding and the stumbling into PTSD, so many things about my reality today, probably 80% of my reality over the past 2 or 3 years is a direct repercussion of that choice. And for better or for worse, it's really both, for better and for worse, I am here in this moment, in this location, in this mindset, in a body, in this state, because Peter Sandhill agreed to support me in that way and did the best he knew how to do so. And other people are going to learn, are going to have a chance through this video and stuff to see into this secret world of trauma and PTSD that is so painful, into the abuse cycles, spiritual abuse and others, that is so painful that many of us have experienced to one degree or another at one point and another. And it's not spiritual to talk about. And yet human beings are having their lives destroyed by aspects of these patterns. And it's not helping High, it's not helping Peter, it's not helping a client, it's not helping a participant, it's not helping the team, it's not helping our humanity. The pattern must be made visible and honored by caring enough about it and caring enough about people to see the pattern and to respond, to care enough about people to respond, to examine how it gets started and look at how to unravel it, how to do something that we really need in our culture and our humanity. I don't believe drugs should be illegal. They obvious, as you can see, require great respect. I don't believe it's healthy or human to throw people in concrete boxes for years for trying to explore their own consciousness, for trying to heal. I don't think there's so many things that are off in these areas, and we need to see them. We need to understand them so that we can start doing something about it.